Too fast. Yeah, I admit. Okay. So, commentary for the day, and then we're going to wrap up. I know we get this question about, what is the nature of Hollywood Temple Bethel in theory and in principle and practice, historically? And the question comes up, somebody's asked us, why are we not Orthodox or Orthoprax, right? So I ask you this question. Has anybody ever had to take a chicken to the rabbi to ask if it was kosher? It was common practice, right? Before you had organized butchers, it was common practice. Today, it doesn't matter. You go to the kosher butcher. It's all wrapped and sealed for you. It has been stamped. It has been koshered with salt and water and so on. And the rabbinic body's already examined it, so you don't have the problem. But not that long ago, Joe, I don't know. Do you remember, Joe? Did you ever take a chicken to the shochet when you were a kid? And then the shochet checked it, and was it kosher, not kosher, right? That's it. That's right. So your mother would go to the butcher, pick out a live chicken. The shochet would be there, cut its neck. He would inspect it. He would say, kosher, is kasher. And then your mother would take it home, salt and soak it. But every Jewish mother also knew. The shochet. Okay. Every Jewish mother in those days, yeah. Did you know which end was up? I was always worried. I knew people were shochet maya. What if you got one knife, it cuts both ends. But yeah, they could do it, and they let them do it. They're still on the Soviets. Okay, yeah, interesting. So, yeah, but the old Jewish mother actually knew a lot of halacha. Maybe she didn't learn it for me, but she knew also to look for certain signs, and if she found a flaw in the chicken, like some kind of problem with one of the organs, she would run with it to the Rebbe or the rabbi. And so now, what would the rabbi say if he had any doubts about the chicken? He would look at the mother and he would do the opposite of what politicians do. A politician looks and says, donation, no, it's kosher. No, the rabbi says the other way. We look at the mother and say, Mrs. Gold is well-to-do. What's another chicken for her? Let her give the chicken away to a non-Jew, buy another chicken, and so he would tell it straight. But he would see the same chicken, but it was brought by Mrs. Ormelite, a poor person. Poor Mrs. Ormelite, so many children to feed, so little money. How precious this chicken is for her. If I have doubts about the chicken, let it be on my conscience. And he would say the chicken is kosher. So what's my point? I'm not a shochet, I'm not a katzab, I'm not a moil, I don't take knives, I don't do nothing like that. But we make a big mistake in assuming that Judaism, as it was, always was as it was, and always will be as it was. It's a mistake. The idea that the law halacha is something clad in iron and that we follow every detail exactly, exactly as it's written. And it really comes to the heart of what it means to be a conservative congregation. And that's why we reject orthodoxy, the concept of orthodoxy in principle. We respect and love our Orthodox colleagues and our Orthodox fellow Jews, and we love Jews of all kinds. But we reject that approach, just as we reject the Reform approach. On principle is our approach, but we love them anyway. That's our obligation. So to be correct, all these terms that we have are not Jewish terms. They're Goyish terms. They're not from us. What's the Reform? That's from the Protestant Reformation. Protestant. Orthodox, where's that from? The Eastern Church, Orthodox Church, right? Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox. That's where it's taken from. Conservative, that's a political movement of the 19th century reacting to the excess of the French Revolution. It's taken from that. Progressive, that's also taken from the beginning of the previous century, which wasn't always a successful progressive movement, like sterilization, things like that. Then there's Reconstructionism, which sounds like something from the aftermath of the Civil War. Concept of purpose, name sort of hard. Then we have New Age. Something's called Aleph, but that is, I hate to say, it's very hippie. It's old, like all old hippies now. And then we have that Oxford Don, who was the great founding force of conservative Judaism, Rabbi Solomon Schechter, used the term Catholic Israel, which is a good translation of an old term, Knesset Israel, the original meaning Catholic meaning unified, but somehow if I say I'm a Catholic rabbi, it doesn't sound right. So that none of these are Jewish terms, right? So do we have a Jewish term to describe what Jews are? Now, more probably could use the contemporary usage in Hebrew for an observant Jew as dati. Not meaning somebody who follows the Jewish religion, but someone who follows the Jewish law, dat. There is no word for faith in Judaism. You have emunah, but it's very vague. There's no one Jewish faith. There's no catechism. We have Maimonides tried, the Ilvo tried, but nobody agreed on anything. Even dat itself, for dati, one who observes the Jewish law, it's not a Hebrew term. It's a Persian term. It's from the Megillah, the Esther, the story of Esther. When Haman complains about the Jews, well, we're going to let an anti-Semite define us that they him. Shanod, Eina Musim, that they melch. Their laws are not different laws, and they don't do the law of the king. Well, I'm not going to let an anti-Semite define for me what it means to be a Jew, so that's also not appropriate. Now, we could go the opposite, we could say chiloni for somebody who's no longer observant, from the word chol, secular. It's very commonly used to describe in modern Hebrew Jews who are no longer observant, but even that's not appropriate. Because most Israelis, even most Jews elsewhere, are not fully secular in the sense of disconnected completely from the heritage and from any kind of religious sensibility, which the word secular indicates. More properly, sense of masoret. A Jew accepts Jewish tradition, a chain of tradition handed down from past generations, not an ironclad law, but a heritage, something we've inherited. So we would say we're in the branch of the Masorti branch, and in Israel they use that term Masorti, not the Dati branch, or we maybe a better word of Orthodox, which is the one faith, is Orthoprax, the one practice, which actually is better for Orthodox, really, but it just doesn't sound right. So the question is, what is our Masor? What is our heritage? And is there truly an Orthoprax, an Orthodox practice? So we may also use the word halachic Jew, a Jew who follows the halacha, but it can be a slippery slope even here, because the question of halacha is always who is the posek, who is the decider of what is the halacha. I finally settled on what I think really is a good term, which is applied by the founder of early conservative Judaism in Germany, Rabbi Zechariah Frankel, who used the term positive historical. It's a little bit clunky, but it says what we want to say. We have a positive attitude to Jewish practice and tradition. We combine it with the recognition we need to understand our historical sources, see how they were applied, and how they were interpreted over the centuries in order to adapt to our needs. Right? That's the whole intention there. So, again, we want to put to bed the error that has always been one uniform and one universal Orthodox Judaism, which has remained the same since Moses' time. There's not been so, and our ancient sages knew it. And they reported this in the Talmud. Long story. Moses goes back to the future. He says, the wonderful Rabbi Akiva, the only one who understands why there are crowns over the Torah, letters in the Torah. I don't know. God doesn't tell me. Only Rabbi Akiva knows in the future. So God takes him to the future to see this great Rabbi Akiva, and he sits in the class, and Moses is dumbfounded. Rabbi Akiva is talking on and on and on and on, and he doesn't understand what's going on, doesn't know a single thing that Moses is talking about. The student says, Moses, how can you claim that this is true? Rabbi Akiva, how can you claim this is true? And he says, obvious. Moses got this at Sinai. There's Akiva saying, everything that I'm saying is from Moses at Sinai. Moses hears this, and he says, well, I feel better. I don't know what he's talking about, but at least I get the tribute. So I know that it's a conclusion of what I started. It's an outcome of what I started. It's not word for word what I said, but it's the natural outcome. So it is said that Moses recovers from this. So what's the message? That in the Rabbi Akiva's time, the sages knew they'd made tremendous innovations. It's not only in Jewish practice, but also in Jewish belief, doctrines, and teaching. They could not base them literally in the Torah, but they honestly believed the principles could be understood from the Torah, even if they had to stand on their head to make their point. Or you prove your point like this. They would do it, as long as you could make the point. They knew that Azman Gorem, Makom Gorem, time and place, determine the interpretation and application of the law. And that's true in all ages. They knew that teachings always depended on the needs of the time. So they had a saying, which is, Eit lasot la'Adonai, heferu Toratecha, from Psalms. literally it says, it is time to act for God, for they have broken your Torah. Revenge, defend. And then the rabbis took it around upside down, which the rabbis do all the time. And they turned it upside down and says, when it is necessary for the cause of God, violate the Torah, right? Turn. They have done into a command, you shall do. Radical change, radical reinterpretation. Now, there are situations where we have one law, and in order to preserve what is necessary, we're going to undo it, even if we have to find some kind of somersault to justify it. Make a medical metaphor. When it's necessary to cut, it might be necessary to cut out a diseased limb in order to save a life and transplant something new and healthy. Classic example, concept of pikuach nefesh, saving a life. Saving life. You violate one Shabbat in order to preserve many Shabbatot. And where does the Torah authorize its own violation? In the book of Maccabees, we know the Jews died because they wouldn't fight on Shabbat. So the Maccabees said, we're going to fight on Shabbat. Jews would not fight to defend themselves on Shabbat. Where do the rabbis find the authorization? Maccabees found an authorization. Where? Where it says, you will observe my commandments in Leviticus 18. 5. You will observe my commandments, my laws and judgments, that a person shall do them and live by them. So the simple meaning is, you shall do them and you shall live according to the commandments. Yeah, you shall live, follow the commandments, do them. The rabbis again, turn around, the pshat, reinterpret the meaning, introduce something external. You shall live by them, but not die by them. Lo shi'amud b'hem. So don't let yourself die in the process, because then you've failed completely. You have to be alive in order to carry out the chai b'hem, right? Complete reinterpretation of straight meaning of the sentence. Now, if you want proof that Judaism changed drastically, look at Hasidism. Today, we talk about Hasidim as the ultra-Orthodox, ultra, pure, perfect Orthodox. Nothing could be further from the truth. Truth is, in its early days, the Hasidim that we say is so Orthodox, they were the heretics of their day. The rabbis of their day condemned Hasidism as a violation of Jewish law. The founder of Chabad himself was thrown into jail because of his innovations by the student of the Gaon of Vilna. So one of the early Hasidic masters gave voice to the movement. What's the nature of the movement? Why did he not follow his father's traditions? Because he had broken from his father's teachings. And he said, I do follow my father's teaching. My father broke from his father, and I'm breaking from my father. So breaking tradition was an integral part of Hasidism. We look at Hasidim today, we don't see that. But really, you look at it, the great teachers of Hasidism in their day, like the Baal Shem Tov and his father, they knew that to make an omelet, you break the eggshell. And it was the readiness to break the eggshell that gave Hasidism its power in its day. Today, you don't see it. I mean, you sense it today in Braslever Hasidism. They still have that energy, that creative, vital energy. They don't have any central Rebbe anymore. Chabad to some extent. Chabad to some extent also has it. Also, a willingness to break boundaries. But the other Hasidim, very much tied in their walls. So, I'm therefore very disturbed when there's an attitude which is widely prevalent that says, we conservative Jews are not really good Jews. They're the Orthodox, or the ultra-Orthodox, they're really preserving Judaism as it should be. And I have to say they do a good job. They're outbreeding everybody. But that's not because they're doing a good job of proving their case. They're doing a good job of convincing women to have children. If I could convince all the women to have more children, I would win my case very easily too. But let's think about women. Yeah. Except who's determining the halacha in Israel? There's a chief rabbinate that none of the Orthodox rabbis follow. I know. There's no body. Government has no. The government should not get into halacha. There's one of the big fights is going to go on if the government gets into halacha. We're in big trouble. They got the area of marriage and family only because they inherited from the British system and didn't want to touch it because we're talking about unity of Jewish people. And there's a lot of immorality in that because of that. We'll talk about it. And so, talk about women, because that's a crucial issue. So, I remember this when there was a young parent, we still had the nursery school here, and there was a parent who was also active in the Russian Chabad synagogue. She talked about the possibility of the two of us joining or merging. And the Chabad wanted to come in here actually at one point. All we would need would be a mechitza down the middle, and two congregations could combine forces. So she made what's common. She said, it's the put down of conservative Judaism, which is, well, we're doing what we can for the general public, but after all, Chabad is the authentic Jewish way. We should all choose to get their point of view. So if that's true, then mixing seating is not that important. Aliyah for women is not that important. It's a big deal. So now I go back. Well, is Chabad the way? For my Orthodox friends, Chabad is questionable because they got caught up in this Rebbe as Mashiach. We want Mashiach now. They're often derided as the Shabtai Tzvi heresy followers. Or as there was a great Rabbi Shach, head of the Lithuanian Agudat Yisrael movement. He says, if I'm reincarnated, but I can't come back as a Jew, I'll come back as a Chabadnik. It's almost as good. Almost as good. Right? So, a lot of in the Orthodox field do think that Chabad is way overboard in many areas. There are certain areas where they make great changes without saying so. But position of women is precisely, it's the big deal. The big deal for which a Ras, the same deal when a rabbi would paskin as a chicken kosher or treif, right? You adjust the law to the needs. And as far as I understand, the Jewish community is at least 50% women. That has not changed. Am I right? About 50% of Jews are women? 49, 51, right? Somewhere, right? Biology has not changed, much as people want to make it change. Conservative movements then made an issue of position of women modern times a fighting issue. It's shed emotional blood. There was a lot of infighting in the movement. I went through a tough battle. It went through a tough battle. It started with my years as a rabbinical school. We had a woman sitting in the Talmud class with Rabbi Lieberman, who was a student for the doctorate, but couldn't be accepted as a rabbinical student. Right? Doctorate, yes, Rabbi, no. Right? That was just starting, though. And then finally, the conservative movement did endorse women as rabbis. It was a decade after the Reform movement did it. And both movements were 50 or 60 years after the first woman was ordained in Germany. Also against the grain of the Reform of its day. It was a private ordination, not by the movement. Even then, it was difficult for the Reform in Germany to accept. So, big changes, big changes. Now, here, if you go back to the years, Joe will remember, Barbara, remember, we had two services running. We would have the main service, they would have the chapel. The chapel was a beautiful crowd. It was a lively crowd. It was quasi-Orthodox, traditional service. Women were not called up to the Torah, but they did have mixed seating. And what was interesting was the actual leader of the chapel for many years was a woman. It was Rebbetzin Henrietta Klein. She was the widow of one of my father's good friends and colleagues. So we had the chapel here. It was a wish to include rather than exclude a group of Jews as much as possible. And I made a point that I was always come into the chapel service, give a Dvar Torah, but it was never to be the standard of our temple, which officially was conservative, not Orthodox. Now, at one point, we did try to, as things were shifting, we did try to mix services from time to time. And I cultivated one of the chapel leaders who was somewhat of an irascible fellow, but I managed to have a good relationship with him until one year we ran a joint service on Simchat Torah, and my mother held a Torah school. And he wouldn't talk to me afterwards. I was so upset. In the meantime, Beth Jacob, an Orthodox synagogue, does give women the Torah schools to hold on Simchat Torah. All right, okay, what can I tell you? So, in conservative fashion, we do not take the Torah from Sinai, the words of the Shulchan Aruch. We're obliged to go to the sources, which is what the author of the Shulchan Aruch himself insisted on. It was only to be a guidebook for young students to help them in their studies. We examine the sources. We search the Talmud. We find it permits women, in principle, to have an aliyah. We found the words of many great ancient rabbis who specifically called up women for an aliyah. We searched our source, found no basis to prohibit women from holding the Torah or putting on the talit or from wearing tefillin. Laws of ritual purity do not apply. Go back to the sources. we found the basis to count women for minyan. Practice was against it, but there were enough sources that we could do it. We found the basis to accept women as presidents of the temples, teachers of Jewish law, as rabbis, leaders of prayer, as cantors, right? We go back to the sources. We find a connection. And we also have to say, also, a word about our community. We do not live in an Orthodox community. If anybody drives here to get here, then by definition, that person is not Orthodox. He's a sinner, by definition. I know the Chabad closes its eyes to driving. Many Orthodox rabbis do, but Jewish law from an Orthodox perspective and principle forbids someone from driving. Certainly forbids the rabbi from giving it a permission. To the supermarket, right. Right. That's the underlying. Right, not conservative, not reform. Conservative reform, give it express permission. That's why if you've been to Beth Jacob, but going back to the Orthodox synagogues, Beth Jacob used to have a parking lot. They turned it into a garden because they didn't want to be seen as encouraging driving. But I'll tell you this. Yeah, I'll give you an example. So what do Orthodox rabbis do? Because they know that people do drive. So when I was a young high school youngster, remember I was a Shabbat guest of the home of an Orthodox rabbi. He was a very nice man. So remember him. He invited me to his lunch, to his home for lunch after the service. So we walked out of the shul on the back door. Why the rabbi goes out the back door? So as not to see who's driving to Shabbat, and so as not to embarrassing anybody who's in the parking lot in front. Yeah, right. That's what I say. So you don't. That's an old halachic trick, which is yeah, and they drive, and they know. This is, I know. So yeah, the Chabad they don't do anything, but it's see no, hear no, speak no. That's right. So, well, that's a problem, right? There's a key problem. So what the Orthodox are doing in this case is an old Jewish principle, which is ignorance of the law is an excuse. If you don't ask and I don't tell you, you don't know and I don't know. So don't ask. Mafreignish. You ever hear that? My father said, Mafreignish. Don't ask the question. Because the minute I give you the answer, you're in trouble. So don't ask. So what did the conservative do? Well, the Reform have no halacha, so there's no problem. But the conservative movement, authorized driving, there is a problem with it. It is a combustion engine. And they found the technical grounds for even the combustible engine to accept it. And again, the principle is better to do something with permission than under prohibition. Not rely on ignorance as an excuse, right? I'd rather have somebody do it with a permission than to say you're doing something forbidden and just close my eyes. So give it, okay. By the way, just now I saw something about the discussion of electric cars. I'm going to go into that because just now I saw something. That's not new. The Orthodox permit it already in theory. I'll talk about that. I already saw that because my father-in-law got a permission already. Yeah. Which word? The Amida. Oh, the prayer, the Amida. Yeah. Right. Yeah, it serves as a unifying point. Yeah, that's why we have not changed. There are a few small changes that the conservative movement made in it. Very small changes. We're very reluctant to, here, I would say we've sort of chopped up the service for ourselves for our needs here, but in general, we're very reluctant to fiddle too much with the core of the text. The idea being that the intention of the prayer book is to serve as something uniform for Jews around the world. So if I start making changes right and left, I lose that uniform connection. And I do want to make sure we need something that serves. So we have core text, a uniform serving. We try to keep those elements. So a Jew from here to there is at home. This is that's the intention. So I want to wrap up. We'll talk about that more later on. About now, I would say. You should not be involved with business worries in general. Right. Yeah. So commerce, commerce per se is forbidden on Shabbat. Because again, that is right. Because it's what you we'll talk about that. What are the principles? Yeah, we'll find out what are the principles. Yeah. So So we'll ask the question. What are the founding principles? Where do we get our idea of Shabbat? Because that's a great way to look into the question of how do we develop law. We as I said, a lot of people love the Orthodox approach, gives an ironclad position in life. It's not just the Orthodox practice, but it's the community, because it is a very warm, close-knit community. The whole point, that's true. But we don't all live in those communities. And we need to deal with Jews who do not live near each other, who no longer have the same commitment to Jewish observance. And so I need to present a Judaism they can live with. That's my whole principle. So, yeah. Tefillin, yeah, that's Chabad. Yeah, only Chabad does it. Yeah, only Chabad does it. And I have to tell you this, they do a good job. People like it. I mean, some people run away from it, but they do a good job. It's only Chabad. They stand outside where there's a high school with a lot of Jewish kids. They're outside across the street. Come in, have tefillin, have I'll give you a kosher hot dog for lunch. But they're not pushing. They never push observance. They want you to feel Jewish. That's their push. That's a break. That's a big break from what is the classic Orthodox, and maybe let's return to original Hasidism in that. It's all worldwide. It's worldwide. They're Americanized. The Rebbe, the late Rebbe was a great promoter. This is his number one claim to fame. I mean, you go anywhere in the world, and you have a place. You want to walk in. I don't care. You eat what you eat, do what you do, but you walk into a Chabad, and suddenly you're at home. And that's what they're trying to create, which is, as I say, is a great innovation. Right? No longer going to push you into it. I want to welcome you into it. Right? But let's go back. I'm going to go back now and say, we're going to look at how it developed. We'll look at this idea of electricity. We'll look at this idea of what's the difference between lighting a match and lighting a switch, electric switch. Why? Is the motion detector a problem? Why? Is a camera a problem? Why? Why not? Right? We'll look at those. So we need to have the whole idea is we need to have a basis that is not based on emotion, not based on sympathy, not based on a reaction to, but based on precedent, like any Supreme Court decision, based on precedent. We don't have, Jews never had a Congress to sit down and make new laws. So we always worked on the court system. We have, yeah. Have you been circumcised? They ask you. Because they're with Russians, and they know the Muslims. That's right. Huh? Yeah, because they understand most Russians were not circumcised, yeah. Whereas American Jews, it's automatic. Yeah, because it's automatic. Even non-Jews, it's almost automatic. That's a big difference. Yeah. Oh, so anyway, let's go back. We're going to talk about that next week, right? And talk about why we make change. Eight lasot nai et Toratecha heferu, be ready to take action for the sake of God, even if it means turning the Torah upside down. By the way, there are issues, there are much more critical issues than electricity. The guna. The wife who's been abandoned by her husband, as firm as he may be, refuses to give her a get. This is a great moral issue that we have to deal with. That's probably the most burning issue that the Orthodox rabbinate has not tackled correctly. Right? And that's more important maybe than anything else of these issues. Many other issues we're going to get into, I'm sure, in the future. At what point do we declare on my computer a human count him for a minion or not? Is it intelligent? Is intelligence enough? Right? We'll get to those problems. Okay, good. Right. So you need to have a system, right, to oh, you can put a timer. But they do it with a basis. Because they will do what really Jews have been doing, which is trying to adjust. Just with that, but they don't want to admit it. Yeah. Yeah. Huh? Yeah. A classic example. Yeah. It's good. Yeah. So now we're going, that's right. So now do I talk to the robot? Yeah. The robot can smoke for you. Classic. As we change from agriculture to mercantile society, the laws against interest no longer become viable. And we have the same problem that the Muslims have. So, right, mixing materials is not a problem, but interest is a problem. Without interest, you have no industry, you have no commerce, you don't feed people. But you're not supposed to take interest. So what do? You do what's called heter iska. You create a fictional setup where you are a partner, an investment partner, which the Muslim banks do also, because they have the same problem. Yeah. All right. So what happens when the contract is no longer valid? Who, on what basis the contract is not valid? What decision is the court doing when there is again, it becomes an immoral situation where you have a marriage that is no longer sustainable. In halakha, a marriage that's no longer sustainable is to be dissolved. It's supposed to be dissolved. If the wife burns the toast, if the man has a job where he stinks, those are grounds for divorce. If you can no longer deal with each other, grounds for divorce. So we are stuck with this problem of aguna, where the man, out of stubbornness, jealousy, anger, refuses to give the wife a divorce. And the courts have no recourse to liberate her. You need to have a great change in halakha. So you can throw him in jail. Man is happy in jail. Somebody feeds him. His wife wouldn't feed him. Now in jail, he's getting food. All right, that's what happens in Israel. In the old world, it was no problem because you could force the guy to give a divorce by putting a harem on him. Nobody would feed the guy. Nobody would talk to the guy. Nobody would do business with him, and he would collapse. So he had to give a divorce. Now you have outs. You don't have those powers. So what do? So you have to come to resolution, right? You have to go to an extra halachic resolution on this. So you need to change. Be ready to change. They haven't done that. And so that is what we call a chilul Hashem. It becomes a desecration of God's name, right? Everything else, you want to have payas, not have payas, you want to work, you know. They ask the question, they send the first religious Jew goes up in space, says, how was it? Oh my gosh, every 90 minutes, on with the tefillin, off with the tefillin, on with the tefillin, off with the tefillin. Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, tempus mutandis, times change. We have to know where we make our decisions and our stands. Okay. So everybody, good Shabbos. Good Shabbos. Good Shabbos. Go ahead. Oh, yes. Rose has found information about the exhibit at the Reagan Library.
They opened up the exhibit announcements. I went to see it in April on a Tuesday. It was packed, even it was Tuesday. The parking lot was packed. I went online, I got my ticket for noon, noon, because not everyone can board the place at 10 o'clock in the morning. They have to time things. I know. Anyway, who had to get through? So I asked, there is no.
Yeah.
Festival. It was supposed to close August 13th, but it's extended to January 28th. I strongly recommend people, it's not a hard place to drive to, assuming you drive, and you just follow the 405 until you take the 180 cut off going west on the Ronald Reagan Interstate. If you can't drive, if you don't have a car, please ask someone that does to go and see it, please.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm off. I'm out. Yeah. You can close. Right? Yeah. I said we're close. Yeah. I said we're. Oh, so say goodbye. Just turn off. I'm off the system already. Just because I said we're shutting down. Okay. Okay.